Good afternoon. I hope you've had a good conference so far. My name's Paul, and this is the closing keynote, and it's entitled The Future of Continuous Delivery. So the talk's actually split into three different parts. Firstly, we're going to take a brief look into the past. That's just going to give a bit of a context as to where we were, where we are now, and how we got here. There's actually some methodical reasons and some key factors that have actually taken us through the past few years, so we're going to briefly cover that before we move into the second section, which is the present. The second section is on the present. It's going to focus on where we are today, what tools are actually available that didn't exist 1 year ago or 2 years ago. In effect, the present used to be the future. And there's things that we didn't have 6 months ago, or 12 months ago, or 2 years ago that we do have today. And so, effectively, we are now living in the future of continuous delivery, and that future is now. The things that we'll cover in the present within the talk are things that you will be able to start taking advantage of right away within your businesses and in your projects. And lastly, we're going to take a look at the future of continuous delivery. Now, the future of continuous delivery is actually what's being worked on right now. Right? It's just not released yet. And so I'll take a look at what's happening and show you what's happening right now, what's being worked on, and also where the trends are shifting as a collective, and like a heads up so that you can keep an eye out for that stuff as it comes across your businesses and across your projects and across your internet and your social media feeds in the next 12 months or so. As technologists, we always try to stay ahead of the curve. So this is a good opportunity to kind of know what's up and coming, and really get in there as like an early adopter to the CD stuff that's shifting now, and really just pipelines in general and the technologies that are at play. Just before we continue, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Paul. I'm an open source contributor. I've been contributing for a long time to projects such as PHP project, the PHP Fig project, which is the standards body for PHP, the Jenkins projects, namely Blue Ocean, Jenkins X. I'm also part of the CD Foundation, which is part of the Linux Foundation. We are effectively a focus of continuous delivery, cloud native continuous delivery solutions that are out there. And I'm also a conference organizer. I organize conferences, and I'm a speaker, a trainer, and I work all across organizations, from software to DevOps, and pretty much jack of all trades. Job titles I've had in my career, I from principal engineer and architect to head of engineering and CTOs in multiple companies, but more specifically I specialise in CICD, and for me the reason was because after you can get the software fantastic, you can get the infrastructure fantastic, you can get the tests fantastic, but really at the end of the day, CICD is the bottleneck of the whole business and the whole teams. So really putting my specialist focus and skills and learning experiences, focusing them on CICD made a big difference in organizations where there isn't that many people that have a specialism in those types of areas. So that's where I got involved in open source stuff with Jenkins and do training and workshops on CICD pipelines and things like that. Now, regardless of all that and all that kind of career history, I still feel like this every day of my career, and I hope you do too, because if you're not, you're not learning, right? You're not learning hard enough. Now I'm a CTO, and a CTO. I said I'm going to start my own startup, as you do, and a couple of years ago I started a new business which is Jenkins Technologies, and it's the basically evolution of recruitment hiring, but with engineering at the heart of it. So it's using engineers to hire engineers ultimately. Our engineering team, we don't build software, we do hiring and interviewing and pre-screening and things like that, and we take the pressure off of your engineering team so that you guys can get and girls get to focus on building software and kind of why you're hired in the first place, rather than all the time and effort spent or wasted dealing with recruitment agencies or doing it yourself. So my team basically will be able to come in and take a lot of pressure off your shoulders, and be able to take care of stuff, and ultimately that's the business, and that's what keeps me busy at the moment. So if this is of interest to you, they've got Jenkins.com. You can take a look. Thank you. The CD Foundation is part of the Linux Foundation, and it's kind of partnered with the CNCF. Ultimately, we're using the technologies that come out of the Cloud Native Foundation, and and also having your own kind of incubator of projects within the CD Foundation itself. Within the Cloud Native, the CNCF, you've got examples of CD software such as Flux, Tecton, obviously Kubernetes not being a CD software but being the major player there. The CD Foundation, we have Jenkins X, which is new Jenkins. It's a cloud native tool. It's nothing like the older one at all. And there's Tecton as well as a good example, and Spinnaker. So in terms of the past and how we got here, this is where we started. We've been like this for about 20 years, right? Up until 5-6 years ago, this is most software, at least most web software, right? And to build CI pipelines or CD pipelines, it was relatively straightforward. We had one Git repo. You push to the repo, it kicks off a pipeline, and it's relatively simple and straightforward, right? Life was predictable and stable and simple. But then something happens, and this is one of the key factors as to why we are where we are today, in terms of all of the internet and the web software, but also specifically the CD landscape and why it's here today. So globally, software companies had to start delivering more software at an unprecedented demand, which created new challenges for us to build new CICD solutions that are adaptive to the trends and the changes that were happening because of the demand on the internet and how many services and devices were connected to software. For example, smartphones being the major player, right? The uptrend in smartphones with apps and web-based just meant all the pressure was hitting all the web-based services that were predominantly monolithic, and that was fair. But obviously, these are the challenges the scaling challenges that we face in the modern world. So, as such, what is the modern world? And clearly we've shifted to a distributed systems architecture, which is not a new thing. It's been around for a long time, but it's fairly new for the web, right? It was, it's used in other fields and other industries, distributed systems, a lot more. But for the web, this is ultimately what changed, because we had to scale and fan out, right? Reduce the risk, reduce the single point of failure, and all these other reasons why we want to do distributed systems these days on the web. But when it comes to any pipeline, companies sell you the dream, or people say this is what it's going to be great, but ultimately what makes a great pipeline is that it's not like scientifically accurate, but it's an organic reflection of your organization and your teams, and how you as humans interact and hand off and coordinate and collaborate with each other to get stuff done. And so that's what makes a good pipeline. And the joke here is, like, ultimately this is what your pipelines end up looking like in reality. Which, if it is a good pipeline, it should look like this, because if that's how you work, right? Or whatever that looks like, then that's a good pipeline. This is an example of a pipeline that I built for a customer, for the UK government, and ultimately this pipeline took 1.5 hours, and I re-architected it and got it down to 12 minutes basically, and there was like lots of developers. So that's an example of not legacy pipelines, standard Jenkins. This is Jenkins pipelines, and when you do it right, it works really well, right? But with great power comes great responsibility, and that's ultimately why a lot of people shifted away from things like traditional Jenkins to other systems. Now, the reason that people started transitioning away from Jenkins, at least not everybody, but large chunks of the community in businesses, and it's because development became really complex, and we had to start sharing code between pipelines because it's like repeating the same stuff, and you've not got one application anymore, you've got like 20, 30 applications, and so you try to scale that. How do we share code between pipelines? How do we keep that under control? There was just no rules. There was no, the Jenkins being the largest software in the world for CICD historically, had no answer for this change because it just wasn't ready to handle all the different things. So it became the wild west of CICD, and we lived that for many years. And so that's just kind of the end of my point of the past. Is kind of what happened. Now, private companies led the way in terms of how you should do microservices, CICD in Jenkins, or whatever. And also Docker was trending at the time. So companies like Weaveworks and CodeFresh, they were really, publishing blog posts and doing conference talks at the time. Like, hey, you can. I've taken normal Jenkins and I've did all this with it, and and it was great advice, and it showed it wasn't as much of a wild west anymore because those companies were providing good examples, but they were a bit unrealistic to the common company because those companies are huge and they're scaling hundreds of applications where you might just have 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, and so the things that they were advocating and other people were maybe not actually that applicable to your company, right? But that's all we had at the time, and then ultimately private CICD companies started to take shape because the software needed to evolve to keep up with the demand and with the change. And so like Circle CI and GitLab and Bitbucket, these companies used money, and investment to really redefine what a CI/CD platform should ideally try and look like from the get-go, right? With no kind of history behind it and just a kind of clean start, right? But the problem is they're general purpose solutions, they're proprietary and they're closed source. So, but they're primitive, and so the problem with them being general purpose is that you have to model your organizations around what you can and can't do in these platforms and these software, and what configurations, what things they let you configure and don't, because ultimately it's just a YAML file that you get, and so that's an abstraction from the actual what's happening, and so as such, as a consultant, when I'm working as a CI/CD consultant, going from company to company, I'm seeing companies with Jenkins, and I'm seeing them having some challenges with it, legitimately, but I'm also seeing a lot of companies trying to use Circle CI and Bitbucket, and they're struggling with that as well, but for different reasons, because they're trying to get the tools to do what they want, but then they can't, so they have to model their organization's processes around what kind of limitations there are to these tools. And in my opinion, that is not the best tool for the job, because you ideally want your pipelines and to be a organic reflection of how you work. And so that's the caveat, right? That's the trade-off between something like Jenkins and the new solutions. Now, given all what I've just said around private companies creating solutions and stuff, there was a trigger of innovation that happened around 5 or 6 years ago within the open source community, and more specifically it was around cloud native technology, which is where it gets a bit interesting. So Tecton happened, right? And for those of you who have not heard of Tecton, it's effectively uses cloud native technologies, it's container based, everything, and you can run it on any Kubernetes cluster, so it can move from company to company, project to project completely seamlessly. It would just attach onto any cluster because it's cloud native. That's the beauty of cloud native. This is an example of Tecton. You can create a pipeline and then you run it, and inside of a pipeline you've got tasks, and inside that task you've got steps, and they run in pods and containers, and as you can, and so on. So effectively they took persistent volumes and all the other kind of Kubernetes stuff and created the first fairly decent cloud native open source solution for CICD. So ultimately the community are thinking, well, that's actually a pretty good idea. What more could we do with cloud native technologies? Let's take a deeper look at this stuff, and and that's here we are today. look. And so when I said like we're in the present right now, but the present is the future, because we didn't have this stuff a couple of years ago, and now it's just growing and growing and maturing at an alarming rate. That now the integration between the CI software and your actual applications is closer than it's ever been, because if you've got a cloud native application that runs on Kubernetes or on a cluster, then your CI software is also created using the same technology. So it's the cohesion between the systems has never been greater, and and that's ultimately where that innovation, that trigger of innovation started, and now here we are. We've got, for example, these things here. Now, there's technologies that were created in the transition to distributed systems and CICD software to manage that, but there's also methodologies and stuff like that that's came out. For example, GitOps. I know GitOps has had a lot of attention recently, rightly so. For those of you who are watching who may have not came across it or just have heard of it but don't really know what it is, you basically, because you've got not one application anymore and you've got 10 applications, how do you know what environments should be running which versions of the 10 applications? And so you could have a staging environment, production environment, you could have testing and loads of other environments, maybe an environment per person in the company, who knows. But ultimately, you need an easy way to manage this and to be quite declarative around what environments should be running which versions. And so that's what GitOps came out of, which is how we can use version control to actually stipulate and specify what the outcome should be. And if you look at the Argo icon, then you'll see that it's listening for that change. And so that's the second part of GitOps, where on one side you're just changing a Git repo or merging pull requests or doing whatever on a Git repo, but then you've got a full CICD system now that's listening for that change and it's reacting to that change and updating and ultimately deploying your apps for you instantaneously. Now, Jenkins X, for those of you who may have not heard of it or may have heard some buzzwords again, ultimately it's a fully blown solution with lots of features and everything is set up for you. Contrary to traditional Jenkins Classic, as we call it, Jenkins Classic was more like, here's some tools, but you have to put them together yourself and you have to configure them yourself, and you can have some nice things if you can get it to work, right? Whereas Jenkins X is the complete opposite of that, which is basically it's cloud native, it can run on any cluster, it can be installed onto any cluster, and if you don't have a Kubernetes cluster, Jenkins X will make one for you. You're just giving it your AWS credentials, and you're telling it to go, and it'll just go and install itself into a cluster, and you'll have stuff just straight away. And that's the beauty of why I've enjoyed using Jenkins X with customer projects, and being open source, is that I can ultimately I can get so much for free now. And so what you do with Jenkins X is you just turn things off that you don't need, or you just tweak and configure things. Now, in terms of what Jenkins X gives you out of the box that the majority of the systems haven't done or won't do, is preview environments, right? A preview environment is where you want someone to be in the organization, like a tester or a project manager or someone, to preview the changes that's on your branch. So you've created a branch of some software and you want to get it up on the cloud in the hands of early, stakeholders or people to get early feedback, right? And that's quite usually a challenging thing to achieve. You have to build it yourself. It's like subdomains like company, like pull request 1 .preview.company.com and pull request 2 and so on. And so that stuff is very, very useful, but it's largely you can't really take it from company to company with you, whereas Jenkins X actually gives you one out of the box. And here is the preview environment. So as soon as you make a new branch and you create a pull request, the Jenkins X bot at the top here, it's actually listening it's watching your repo and it's tracking it, and as soon as you create a pull request, it will go and we actually create a preview environment for you and take the code and the changes on that pull request on the code and deploy that on automatically create a subdomain for you. Now, because we're using Kubernetes here for this solution for Jenkins X, then it has access to the ingress rules on your Kubernetes cluster, which is, ingress rules are incoming routes, URLs or host names or something that's coming into your cluster. So you don't need to wait for DNS to update. It's instantaneous because the cluster has its own DNS, rules. So Jenkins X just gets to work and instantly does it, and then it puts a message back onto the pull request, and say, hey, there's a preview environment ready here, and you can check me out. Click it, and so it's a refreshing change, right, from where things were before, and ultimately I highly recommend you check it out. This is the ultimately how what Jenkins X is. It's just a Kubernetes manifest and a nice setup. It gives you pre-built environments out of the box, so that you can see it gives you staging and production, and you can set up your own ones. Again, this is just config files, very simple, very easy stuff. You just define your environments, and if you've got automatic promotion between environments, or you want to manually promote something up, like for production, for example. And on the left-hand side, which is quite cool, is the data, the information around all your builds and all your deployments. It's all stored in data, so the user interface is no longer coupled to that, and therefore right now you can go to Google and type in Jenkins X user interface, and you'll see different custom built user interfaces that people have made. So those are built using like the latest technologies, because it's all container based. So it's like React.js and all the cool stuff, and it's just really powerful, really lovely kind of interfaces. Dashboards basically are out there to manage your workflows. So anyway, that's Jenkins X. It's pretty cool, and definitely have a play around with it, or watch some YouTube videos or read some docs. It's worth a look for sure. The next project I'm going to focus on is Flux. Now, Flux is an innovation that's came out of the Cloud Native community, and it's part of the CNCF. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on Flux as compared to other projects. Flux is quite mature, and it's a lot more mature than, say, things like Jenkins X. The key and unique thing about Flux is it's very, very good, very deep integrations into the Kubernetes engine itself. It's created using Golang, so ultimately it's got very tight integrations, and so it has been around for a while. But and the reasons you would choose Flux over other tools that we'll cover, for example, Spinnaker or Argo, would be because it's lightweight, right? So Flux is really lightweight, but it doesn't have the largest feature sets. It doesn't have all the fancy bells and whistles that things like Argo will have, but it's gonna do one job and do it really well, and that's Flux. And so if you haven't checked it out yet, again, it's cloud native. You can attach it to any cluster, so you can make your own local clusters on your own local machine, or spin up a temporary cluster and have some fun and check it out. But yeah, highly recommend check out Flux, and this is something that is already available to download. Next, we're going to focus on Argo. Now, Argo is probably, in my opinion, the most comprehensive suite of tools and projects. Argo CD is actually an umbrella of projects, and it has Argo workflows, which is what we would call pipelines. So recognize the names now as an industry, trending, changing. They're no longer called pipelines, they're called workflows. We've got Argo, and that will make sense later in the talk when I come back to the point of the kind of terminology and the trends at the end of the talk. In terms of Argo events, that is already something that exists. You can use that. Other CICD solutions do not have event-based architectures, event-based systems. They're just not at that cutting edge yet, right? And ultimately, Argo is larger than, say, Flux. So with Flux being quite lightweight, Argo offers more, but it also is you know, it's a bit larger and can sometimes feel a bit clunkier. But it depends. You know, it's very subjective. It's an opinionated thing rather than how good or technically good the tool is. But notably, the good thing about Argo is that out of the box, it works with GitOps as an example, and other things. And so the Argo CD is a great example of a project and a team that is really pushing best practices out there in the industry for, you know, so that you don't have to like transition. I mean, you could use Argo CD without GitOps, but like good luck trying to turn it off, right? And so, you know, everybody's like kind of on the same page, and it's driving people into the future, I suppose. And so that's why I think that Argo gets good recognition for myself. Now, interestingly enough, this is a tool that I've given this talk at a few conferences now and over the past few months, and this is the tool that I'm surprised not many people have heard of as much, but that number is growing every single week as it gets more popular. So I'm going to dedicate some time in this talk to Tecton itself. So Tecton is what we call a control plane. Now that's kind of terminology that you would hear in the Kubernetes world, whereby the engine of the Kubernetes engine, not your apps, but the engine is kind of like a control plane for all of your different services that you're running, right? So it's kind of like overarching orchestration type situation. Now, Tecton is kind of like that, but for your environments that you're running software upon, right? Or for the workflows that you create. So it handles what you call full lifecycle management of your applications and services. So end to end, from, you know, building them initially to like deploying them and actually monitoring them. And what is unique about Tecton is it's not yet another CICD tool, right? It's an umbrella tool. I mean, sure, you can do all your CD stuff directly into Tecton anyway if you want to, right? That's fine. It's totally cool. But what's unique about it is it's an umbrella around other tools, and it is integrating with these other systems, and it's bringing all your different systems that you have, you know, across your various projects and your various, you know, organizations, and it allows you to bring everything under one hood. And that's what's unique about it, and it integrates and it communicates using APIs and whatnot to these other systems, so you don't have different, for example, and it integrates. The last point here is it's integrating monitoring and observability tooling into the heart of your CD solution, which is a very unique thing. And you know, historically, these systems are very separate, right? You've got your CD solution. Even that's true today, like GitHub Actions or Jenkins or whatnot, and you're triggering a line of code which is then, you know, telling something else, right? Like Terraform, Go, or Ansible, or you know, whatever, and it'll go and it'll just leave the CD system and it'll trigger something else, and it'll do that. But the CD system is completely decoupled from your production environment, ultimately, apart from just deploying stuff to it, but not actually like monitoring it and managing it in real time. So I hope that made sense so far. It's a little bit easier to understand when you can visually see it for yourself, rather than trying to, you know, theoretically explain it. So here's a screenshot of something from a Tecton dashboard, but as you can see, there's 3 different like environments. There's like dev, staging, production. Now the key thing I want to highlight on this picture is it says SLO score 97%. Now, what does that mean? Well, an SLO is a, you know, service level objective, and that's, you know, how much uptime the company has. Or doesn't, and you know, a business has to have like a percentage where they must never go below this number. It's like a contractual thing, like a bank, right? Banks cannot go down and things like that. So that's what an SLO is, and in this case, the CD solution is actually monitoring your production environment in real time, and it's given it a score there, right? And that's because it's a pure reds. Now, this could be useful for things if you think like a performance testing environment or a stress testing environment, right? You can, as part of your cycle to production, your journey, your path to live, as they call it, you can put in there like deploy to staging, deploy to stress testing or performance testing environment, and then run a test suite, and boom, and then ultimately it will start tracking that in real time as you test it and stress test it, and you'll get scores. And the easy thing, the fantastic and unique thing about Tecton is that and it's in the configuration files, because when you are integrating your monitoring solution and there are alerts that are triggering or certain metrics that are firing off, then typically as a team, when you get a problem, you're just like, there's a problem, and you look at it, right? And then you go, okay, we think this is the problem. Then you manually go over to your CD system and start to like roll back stuff or change things, right? Now, in this case, you can configure Tecton to automatically do things for you, like roll back, or roll back after 3 minutes if after 3 minutes the latency of certain things starts to go up by 2%, right? Or and so there's good rules in there, and you can bake them in automatically, and ultimately it can do automatic recovery for you. It's one example where that could be very powerful. Stress testing is when you're building your stuff, whereas production as well is against a production environment, and you can set the rules so it can recover itself, but you get really good control. And if you can compare the kind of self-healing systems, like just what you get in your Kubernetes applications, right? So right now you have autoscalers, and they are based on like CPU and RAM and other things where you would scale up and scale down your system, and that's good, but they're quite primitive metrics to work off of, because your CPU and your RAM could be very fine. You could have a latency problem, a networking problem, and Kubernetes won't necessarily easily detect that, but this Tecton will, and so it's integrating with things like New Relic and Prometheus and stuff like that. So it's got very, very good visibility into your system. And so, to cut a long story short, now it's basically take New Relic and take your CD solution, put them together, and you get some really powerful stuff there that it will really change how we think about CD. So again, we're living in the present right now, and so this is effectively the future, and I highly recommend that you check this out. Now, when I said that Tecton integrates your tools, this is exactly what it does. So it uses Helm charts to manage things. Helm charts. If you've got your own Helm charts of your own containers in Kubernetes, then it will be able to just listen to that and react very, very naturally and very easily. Then you've got things like Argo CD. So the second icon here, just to the left of Jenkins, that's Argo. So if you think about it, you can build a Jenkins pipeline, and you can build an Argo pipeline. Maybe you have both. Maybe you have most of your company is on Jenkins legacy, for example, but you're modernizing some parts, so you're putting it into Argo. So, but you're doing it piece by piece, and rather than like the big bang approach where you have to change it all. So, if you think about it, Tecton will let you create a workflow, like a pipeline, but a workflow, and you can trigger parts of your Jenkins pipelines, and then you can trigger some Argo stuff, right? And you can trigger some other bits. So and over time you can reduce the amount of steps that are in your Jenkins pipeline and start increasing the Argo one, but your overall sort of journey and flow of your business will not change, because you've created a Tecton workflow, which again is a control plane. It's it's a level above the rest of the CD tools, and so that's why I've was quite exciting, and highly recommend you check out what the Tecton team are up to. Now, here is an example of a Tecton workflow where you start from on the left hand side, which is I've pushed a new copy of my application container, and then it all kind of kicks in. On the left hand side is kind of GitOps and doing some stuff, and on the right hand side is things kicking off. So if you look at the right hand side, you see like it's doing deploys, right? Different types of deploys. Now, what's important here is to look at number 5, which is running a test suite, right? Now that test suite could actually be a test suite you're directly triggering from Tecton, or it could just be a trigger to your Jenkins or your Argo or your Flux or your probably GitHub Actions, or other systems, right? So it's triggered it off, and then this is where Tecton starts to change, right? Compared to different CD solutions. So number 6 is monitoring provider on the right hand side is giving real-time feedback. So my point is, now when you're inside of your pipeline, you can just wait for like 20 seconds or whatever you're doing, if it's you're deploying, and you can just let it sit and wait and just relax and be like, you know what, we've done it, let's just give it. And then you can set how long you want to observe things for, like 2 seconds or 30 seconds or 3 or 4 minutes, and just sit there and chill out and wait. And then if it's all good, then it'll do the right deployment strategies, like blue-green deployment as per number 8 here, or whatever you want. And as you start to roll out more of the new ones, effectively you might start to get bad feedback, which is number 9, which is there's a problem when it's starting to occur, and ultimately now we're seeing the value of cloud native, again, like the CD Foundation projects and other ones, the value of those cloud native CD solutions being able to integrate directly into the heart of Kubernetes as a cluster to do things like rollbacks, right, or blue-green deploys or rolling updates. So they're all the different deployment strategies. It takes advantage of them, but most importantly understands them and the differences, and you can very easily just configure things, config files like this application does this and this is that. Now, as per number 11 here, it's bad, and so it's just rolling automatic rollback, or it could be a manual button, then it's alerting you or whatnot, but it can also just be an automatic rollback as well, and alert people in the morning when they wake up and say, hey, we tried to deploy something, but it's rolled back now, but you got some sleep, and you can check out in the morning and debug it and figure out why it's broken. So yeah, kudos and shout out to the Tecton team. And now we move on to the final section of the talk, which is the future of continuous delivery. Now, as mentioned before, the future of CD is actually what's being worked on right now, and so we're going to take a look into actually what's being worked on right now by the open source community, by the CD Foundation, but also where the trends are moving towards as well, and where the definition of a pipeline or the definition of a workflow is changing to be adaptive and so I suppose current with the times as to how the industry is changing as well when it thinks about continuous delivery. So first of all, the CD Foundation is working on interoperability and events are the main things within focus here. Now, the ML ops part is really around how do you treat machine learning models and other areas as first-class citizens rather than just deployments, because ML, machine learning and things, they work slightly differently to the rest of web applications, and so a different mindset and a different approach will probably be required there to get more value out of that. I'm personally not close to that ML side of things within the CD Foundation, but I wanted to raise awareness to it so that those of you who are able to keep an eye out for this evolving over time. With regards to interoperability, this is exciting because it's really something that hasn't really been focused on before. The reason the interoperability is exciting because you can, without even caring, you can trigger another CD or CI system from your current CI or CD system, and you just say, hey, I'm inside the Jenkins pipeline, but I've been modernizing it, and I've been modernizing it with, say, some Argo or Flux stuff on the side, and you can ultimately call out from your old Jenkins pipeline or from wherever you are, right? Whether you're in Argo and you're calling Flux, or you're in Flux and you're calling Jenkins, it's not going to matter anymore. It's really the pipeline will become a small part of the main workflow ultimately, and you'll be able to, going forward, no longer the community will no longer need to have the mindset of, oh, hey, it's all or nothing, it's one or the other. Now it's going to be, hey, use the right tool for the right job, at the right part in your process. And so that's quite an exciting future that I'm very close. I'm very enthusiastic seeing how that evolves and develops over time. But so as a heads up, we're moving away from big bang approach, and it's more going to be transitional and interoperable. With regard to the event SIG, we're standardizing CD systems in terms of the events that are produced and consumed across the systems. Then there's a slide just after this that will go into more detail on that, so it makes more sense as to what specifically is being worked on. Additionally, what you can expect in the future from a trending perspective as a community. Initially, we had Jenkins, which was unopinionated, roll your own, put it together yourself, and then we transitioned over to closed source proprietary companies where they have a very they're general purpose opinionated tools, so you can't really change how the systems work too much. Really, just you have a YAML file and you're only able to change what they allow you to change. So that's fair enough. But what we're seeing now is things coming full circle again, and the community, the open source community, really being able to deliver and produce solutions that allow us to have full control over our systems. For example, things like Flux and Argo, Tecton, Jenkins X. Argo CD is driving us into the future with event-driven pipelines. So right now, out of the box, you can pick up event-driven pipelines rather than traditional workflow or traditional pipelines, and you can start using that. That's called Argo events, right? It's part of the Argo CD project. So definitely recommend you take a look at that. It's going to be quite insightful, and if you're already using Argo and you're not using Argo events, definitely research it to see how you could start to take advantage of the future in which Argo are the main player in that event-driven market that are providing the solutions and the ability to do things with that already. But it's not hit mass market yet, so that's why this is kind of cutting edge a little bit. Tecton is becoming a control plane for all of our applications and tools, so therefore you no longer need to think about I have a CD system here and I have a CD system here. You have Tecton, which will integrate and pull in your various different tool sets, not just the CD systems but the monitoring systems as well, connect that all up to create a central place that you can control your entire infrastructure and the life cycle of your services from the dev to production to post-production, and manage all that in a very nice way. So definitely keep an eye on Tecton. Something that's working on right now is called FSA. It was the Flux subsystem for Argo, which allows the Argo system to make effectively native calls out to Flux in order to let Flux take over and do the good things that Flux can do better than, say, Argo or other tools, because Flux has its own USP. So that's being worked on right now. If this is of any interest, you just Google for Argo FSA or Flux FSA, and you can start to research that yourself. And again, that's coming, and that will allow a very cohesive, very strong integration between the Flux and the Argo systems. Now, what's coming in the future is the innovation of pipelines. This has already started, but again, it gets more and more mainstream as time goes on. So the pipelines were traditionally webhook based, and it's a single unit. It's one big pipeline, right? A pipe is straight. But we're on the edge of reinventing what the definition of a pipeline, which we would call a workflow these days. We started reinventing it, but we're going even further than that, because we're not just having one workflow that has lots of steps in it, kind of like a pipeline, but not quite, but actually taking your pipeline and splitting that into small, granular mini pipelines or tasks, or something that's part of a larger piece. But it's quite agnostic. Now, how will this small, granular task fit into the larger model? Well, that's where the event-driven architecture starts to really take, allow you to really supercharge this. Now, which I'll go into in a second, more detail, more on events. And lastly, the pipelines will no longer actually be the ones that trigger the deployment of your apps. Right now, you may have a pipeline that's doing like Terraform deploy or Helm deploy or Ansible Go or something like that, right? In the future, it's going to be like I'm omitting an event from my part of my pipeline or my workflow to say I am finished with my task, and then the deployment part will be listening for that to be finished, and then it will take over. So you're not going to directly execute things, more about other things, listening for one part to be finished, and then it will be reacting to that, and that will ultimately do the deployments, and it will be you personally and your pipeline directly responsible for that. There'll be a dedicated deployment pipeline sort of set up for that. if that made sense and wasn't too contradictory a little bit. And to give you an example of event-based architecture pipeline, you'll have, you'll have maybe 100 different steps. Now this is fantastic for reusability. If you remember back at the beginning, I said when we moved into the microservices architectural world and we were trying to share code between our different pipelines because we no longer had one app, but we had 10 or 20 or 100 apps. Now this is the great example where you can build something that's very context agnostic, and you can just put them together in custom workflows, and they will be a part of your pipeline or workflow will trigger an event or emit an event, and then another part of the pipeline will be listening for that event, right? And so it's all about creating an events and listening for events rather than one big pipeline that must always have the same idempotent path that over and over and over. It's more of a reactive and an organic flow. If you remember when I was speaking at the start of the talk around having pipelines be an organic, natural reflection of your team and your business's processes, this is really how you get to that level with as little friction as possible, because these events can happen, but it's about the context of why the event happened or where or when the event happened. And so when building context agnostic systems, that means you can completely reuse the code, but the decisions that are happening within that are going to be very contextual and allow you to put together very rich and organically reflective workflows for your organizations. And in this case, as the example, it's deploy, it's scanning Docker images, and if it's passed, then it will move on to deploy, and then deploy will do that, and then it will say deploy complete, and then a run test will be listening for that, and it will run the test, and if the test pass or fail, then eventually there's that. Now in CD Foundation, they're working on the CD events, which is it's basically a standardized list of events that are being defined as an interoperable standard, and the other CD systems are going to be adopting these in effect. And so which is even better, because you're not just emitting an event between parts of the same workflow, it can actually trigger events across subsystems, across the different architectures. So if you're saying my test suite has passed, well then it might actually go to another system and call out, and that system will be listening for the event, and that will take in. So it's no longer primitive, it's very create your own flexible things across the multiple systems with the interoperability. So to summarize, it's interoperability, it's systems talking to each other, it's event-based systems, and you can already check this out and play around with it if you look at Argo events, and check out CD events from the CD Foundation as well. That's all from me for now. That's all we have time for. If you're interested to learn more about this, please keep an eye out for myself giving the talks at other conferences, because this talk is always evolving as the things in the ecosystems evolve and mature over time. If you'd like to ask any questions or chat or whatnot, you can find me on LinkedIn with my name, Paul Dragunis, or the same with Twitter. And if you want to get in touch for anything more private, whether you would like to, get support with bringing these tools into your organizations, you can reach out to myself and my team at dragunis.com as well. I hope you've had a good conference, and I hope you had a good evening. That's all from me.